Be me, 34 years old, working as a content strategist for a marketing firm. Consider myself pretty successful. I spent most of my 20s and early 30s building my career, proving I could compete in any room. Always made it a point to speak up when I noticed inequalities. Never let things slide. Grew up watching my mom defer to my dad on everything. Promised myself I'd never be like that. She had a degree but gave up her career to raise us. Always seemed slightly resentful. Vowed to myself that I would never compromise my ambitions for anyone. Lately been really active in this online community where we discuss workplace dynamics. Not going to name it because it doesn't matter, but it's where a lot of professional women share experiences. Spend a good hour or two every evening scrolling through posts, commenting, sharing my thoughts. Feel like it's important work, helping other women recognize when they're being undervalued. The discussions are always so validating, everyone gets it. One evening, I'm browsing through posts and see this thread about domestic labor. Someone's talking about how her husband doesn't do his share of housework. Start thinking about all the stats I've read about women doing more unpaid labor. Get kind of fired up thinking about it. Decide to make a post about something that's been on my mind lately. Write this long post about how men have basically structured society to avoid real work. Explain how they've created this hierarchy, where physical labor is valued over the complex multitasking women do. Point out how men love to act like their jobs are so hard, but they just do one thing at a time. Meanwhile, women are managing households, doing emotional labor, keeping everyone's lives running. Get into how men have convinced everyone that sitting in an office or doing manual labor is somehow harder than the invisible work women do. Write about how the lazy husband trope exists for a reason. Talk about how men coast through life on the infrastructure women provide. Mention how they love to complain about how hard they work, but don't even notice all the work happening around them. Feel pretty good about the post. Think I made some solid points. It's well written, logical, backed up by things I've observed in my own life. Hit submit and go make myself dinner. Check back an hour later and the post has like 200 upvotes and tons of supportive comments. Everyone's sharing their own stories about lazy partners and male colleagues who coast by. Feel validated, like I've really contributed something meaningful to the conversation. Screenshot some of the best responses to save for later. Couple days go by and I kind of forget about the post. I make a lot of posts, it's just part of my routine. Then one evening I'm scrolling and see that someone has linked to my post from a different forum. Apparently it got cross-posted somewhere and now people are discussing it. Curiosity gets the better of me and I click through. It's some forum I've never heard of, seems to be a mixed group of people. Bunch of comments on my post, and not all of them are supportive. Whatever, I expected that. Can't say anything online without someone getting defensive. But then I see this one really long comment that has a bunch of awards next to it. It's from some guy, username doesn't matter, clearly blue collar based on his other posts. I decide to read it, even though I'm already annoyed. He starts off by saying he read my post and found it interesting. Okay, condescending start, but go on. Then he breaks down his typical workday as an industrial maintenance technician. Goes into detail about how he wakes up at 4 in the morning to be at work by 5. Describes working in temperatures that range from below freezing to over 100 degrees. Talks about crawling into confined spaces, breathing in dust and fumes despite the masks. He mentions the constant risk of injury, the guys he knows who've lost fingers or worse. Describes the physical toll, the knee problems, the back pain, the hearing loss despite protection. I'm reading this and rolling my eyes because, okay, he chose that job, no one forced him. But he keeps going. He starts talking about the mental aspect of his work. How he has to constantly troubleshoot complex machinery. How one mistake can shut down an entire production line and cost the company hundreds of thousands. How he has to read electrical schematics, hydraulic diagrams, PLC programs. How he has to stay current with new technology while also understanding legacy systems. Describes having to make split-second decisions about whether a sound or smell means something's about to fail catastrophically. Then he gets into the schedule. Talks about being on call every 3rd week, meaning he can't go anywhere or have a drink because he might get called in. He describes getting called out at 2 in the morning to fix a breakdown, working until 6, then having to come back for his regular shift at 5. Mentions missing his kid's birthday party last month because of an emergency call. Talks about how he's missed countless family events, how he's always exhausted, how his body is breaking down at 42. Starting to feel a little defensive reading this, but I keep going. Then he addresses my point about men not doing their share at home. Says he gets home around 6 most nights, later if there's overtime or an emergency. His wife works too, she's a nurse, also demanding job. He describes their division of labor at home. Says he does all the yard work, all the home repairs, all the car maintenance, all the outdoor stuff. Takes care of the garbage, handles anything that requires physical strength. Helps with dinner when he's home in time, does dishes, bathes the kids when he's not completely destroyed. Weekends he's doing projects around the house, fixing things, keeping everything running. He acknowledges his wife does more of the day-to-day household management. But then he makes this point that really gets under my skin. Says that his job pays for 70% of their household income. And that while he respects everything his wife does, he's literally selling his body and health to provide for the family. Says he'll probably need knee replacements before he's 50. Mentions that guys in his field often don't make it to retirement, their bodies give out first. I'm getting more irritated as I read because he's completely missing the point. This is exactly the kind of thing men do, making everything about them and their struggles. But he's not done. He starts addressing the lazy husband thing directly. Says, yeah, there are definitely lazy husbands out there, he's not denying that. But then he flips it around. Asks why we never talk about lazy wives. Says he knows plenty of women who don't work and also don't keep the house particularly clean. Knows women who spend hours on social media while their working husbands come home to chaos. Points out that the lazy husband on the couch image is acceptable, but you'd never see the reverse portrayed. Now I'm actually getting annoyed because this is whataboutism, classic derailing. But I keep reading because I want to see where he's going with this. Then he gets to the part that really pisses me off. He directly quotes my line about men coasting through life on the infrastructure women provide. And he just demolishes it. Talks about how the actual infrastructure, the literal infrastructure, is built and maintained by men. The roads, the bridges, the power lines, the water systems, the sewage treatment, all of it. Points out that the electricity I'm using to make my post is probably being generated and maintained by men. The internet infrastructure, maintained by men. The building I live in, built by men. The plumbing, the heating, the structural integrity, all of it. Says that when I flip a switch and the lights come on, I don't think about the guys who strung those power lines. When I turn on the tap and clean water comes out, I don't think about the guys maintaining the treatment plants. Now, when I'm warm in winter, I don't think about the guys who installed and maintain the heating systems. When the garbage truck comes, I don't think about the guys hauling trash in all weather. He makes this point about invisible labor. Says women talk a lot about their invisible labor, the emotional work, the household management. And he says that's valid, he's not dismissing it. But then he points out that men's labor is also invisible to most people. We just expect everything to work. Expect the roads to be paved, the power to be on, the water to flow, the garbage to disappear. Never think about the army of mostly men making that happen. Reading this and trying to find the flaw in his argument. There has to be something wrong with what he's saying. It feels like he's making a point but also somehow missing the bigger picture. Then he addresses my comment about men doing one thing at a time versus women's multitasking. He literally laughs in text form. Describes a situation from last week where he was troubleshooting a hydraulic system failure. Had to simultaneously monitor pressure readings, listen for abnormal sounds, watch for leaks, coordinate with the production supervisor about timing, train a new apprentice, and stay aware of other workers in the area for safety. All while working around hot equipment in a confined space. Says the idea that his work is simple or single-focused shows a complete lack of understanding. Okay, that actually makes me pause a bit. I genuinely never thought about it that way. But I'm still not ready to concede the argument. He wraps up with this part that really gets me. Says he's not trying to diminish women's work or struggles. Acknowledges that women face real discrimination and real challenges. But says that painting all men as lazy and claiming they coast through life is ignorant and insulting. Points out that most men he knows work themselves to the bone. Many of them are doing it for their families, for wives and kids they love. They're sacrificing their bodies, their time, their health. And then they go online and see posts like mine calling them lazy. Says his dad was the same way, worked in a factory for 35 years. Died at 68 from mesothelioma, lungs destroyed despite all the safety equipment. Spent his whole life providing for his family and never complained. And now his generation of men gets called lazy and privileged. The comment ends with him saying he hopes I'll consider that maybe my perspective is limited to my own experience. Suggests that before making sweeping statements about men being lazy, I should spend a day doing what he does. Says he'd be happy to swap jobs for a week. He'll sit in my office and I can crawl around industrial machinery. See who's begging to quit first. Sitting there staring at my screen feeling this weird mix of emotions. Part of me is angry because this feels like an attack. Part of me is defensive because I don't like being told I'm wrong. But there's this small part that's uncomfortable because some of what he said rings true. I don't want to admit it though. Start mentally preparing my response. Going to point out all the things he's missing about systemic inequality. I'm going to explain how his individual experience doesn't negate the broader patterns. Going to break down how the patriarchy hurts men too, and that's not women's fault. But before I can start typing, I notice the other comments. Hundreds of them now. Lots of other blue-collar guys sharing their own experiences. Construction workers talking about the injuries, the weather, the physical toll. Electricians talking about the danger, the complexity, the responsibility. Plumbers, mechanics, welders, all of them pushing back on my characterization. But it's not just men. There are women too. Women married to blue-collar workers talking about what they see their husbands go through. Women who work in trades themselves, describing the demands. Even women who agree with me on a lot of feminist issues saying, I missed the mark on this one. One woman writes about watching her husband leave for work in the dark and come home in the dark for years. Talks about the toll it took on him, how he aged rapidly, how he was always in pain. Says he never complained, never asked for recognition, just did what needed to be done. And she's angry that someone would call that coasting or lazy. Another woman who works as a welder describes her own experience. Talks about the sexism she faces in the field, which is real. But also talks about how demanding the work itself is. Says the idea that physical labor is somehow easy or less valuable than office work is classist and wrong. That word hits me. Classist. Am I being classist? No, that's not what this is about. I'm talking about gender dynamics, not class. But the more I read, the more uncomfortable I get. People are making points I can't easily dismiss. They're not being illogical or emotional. They're presenting their lived experiences and they contradict my narrative. Try to think about the men in my own life. My dad worked in sales, was gone a lot, but I remember him being tired. My uncle was a contractor, remember him always having some injury or another. My grandfather worked in a shipyard, died young from a heart attack. But that's different, right? That's just the patriarchy making men think they have to be providers. That's toxic masculinity forcing them into these roles. Except the welder woman addressed that too. Said she chose her job because it pays well and she finds it meaningful. Said framing it as, victimhood is insulting. She's not a victim of anything, she's a skilled tradesperson. Closed my laptop feeling frustrated. This isn't how this was supposed to go. My post was supposed to spark discussion among people who got it. Instead, it got hijacked by people who don't understand systemic analysis. Try to let it go, but I keep thinking about it over the next few days. That maintenance guy's comment keeps popping into my head at random times. When I flip on the lights in the morning. When I'm sitting in my heated apartment during a cold snap. When I flush the toilet and don't have to think about where that goes. Start noticing things I didn't before. The garbage truck that comes by every Tuesday morning, guys hauling bins in the freezing rain. The construction crew working on the street, out there in the heat. The delivery drivers constantly moving, always rushing. One day, the heating in my building stops working. It's the middle of winter and it's freezing. Maintenance guy shows up within an hour. I watch him work for a minute. He's down in the mechanical room, surrounded by pipes and machinery. Looks hot and cramped and uncomfortable down there. He's there for 3 hours, troubleshooting, testing, fixing. When the heat comes back on, I feel relieved and grateful. He just packs up his tools and moves on to the next problem. I don't say anything to him. What would I say? But I think about that forum comment again. Try to push it out of my mind by going back to my usual online spaces, looking for posts that will make me feel validated again. Find plenty of them. Women sharing stories about incompetent husbands. Discussions about weaponized incompetence. Posts about men who can't handle basic household tasks. These posts make me feel better temporarily. Yes, this is the real issue. Men who pretend they can't load a dishwasher. Men who need constant instruction to do simple tasks. Men who treat their wives like project managers. But now there's this voice in the back of my head, the one that sounds like that maintenance worker, asking if I'm confusing some men's behavior with all men. Asking if I'm ignoring an entire category of work because it doesn't fit my framework. I don't like that voice. It's making me question things I've been certain about for years. Decide to do something I've never done before. I look up what that maintenance guy actually does in more detail. Search for industrial maintenance technician job descriptions. The requirements are extensive. need to understand electrical systems, mechanical systems, hydraulic systems, pneumatic systems. We need to be able to read complex technical drawings, need various certifications, often need years of experience. The physical requirements are intense. Lifting, crawling, working at heights, confined spaces, exposure to all kinds of conditions. Look at the salary. It's decent, better than I expected, but not amazing considering what they're doing. Certainly not enough to justify destroying your body. Then I make the mistake of looking at workplace fatality statistics. Men account for over 90% of workplace deaths. The jobs with the highest fatality rates are almost all male-dominated. Logging, fishing, roofing, construction, trucking, farming. Men are dying at work at vastly higher rates than women. This information sits uncomfortably in my brain. I try to fit it into my existing understanding. That's the patriarchy though, right? Men are pushed into these dangerous roles by societal expectations. Toxic masculinity tells them they have to be tough and take risks. It's still a gender issue, just a different angle. But even as I think this, it feels hollow. Like I'm trying to explain away something that doesn't fit. These men are working dangerous jobs. Many of them are doing it to support families. And calling them lazy seems, in retrospect, incredibly insulting. The really uncomfortable thought creeps in. The one I've been avoiding. What if I was wrong? Not about everything, not about feminism or equality or women's struggles, but about this specific thing. What if that post was ignorant and unfair? I don't want to admit it. Admitting it feels like betraying something important. Feels like giving ground to people who want to dismiss women's real issues. Feels like agreeing with men who derail every conversation about sexism. But sitting here in my comfortable apartment, climate controlled without me thinking about it, electricity flowing without me understanding how, water coming out of the tap clean and safe, internet connection stable and fast, all of it maintained by people I never see doing work I don't understand. And I called the people who make this possible lazy. Said they coast through life. Dismissed their labor as simple and easy. The worst part is realizing that I did exactly what I accuse men of doing. I made invisible labor that I don't value. Because it's not my labor, because it's not what I do, I decided it was less important. I centered my own experience and dismissed everything else. That maintenance worker was right. My perspective was limited to my own experience. I looked at the world from my position and assumed I saw the whole picture. But I was only seeing the parts that affected me directly. Think about writing a response or an apology. But what would I even say? Sorry for calling you lazy. I didn't realize you were destroying your body to keep society running. That sounds patronizing even in my head. Instead, I just sit with the discomfort. Let myself feel wrong for maybe the first time in years. I've been so sure of myself, so confident in my analysis. Built this whole identity around being someone who sees through the bullshit. Someone who speaks truth to power. Someone who doesn't let things slide. But what if sometimes I'm the one who's wrong? What if my truth is sometimes just my limited perspective? What if speaking up isn't always brave if I haven't bothered to understand the full situation? Delete my original post. Not because anyone asked me to, but because leaving it up feels dishonest now. It represents a level of certainty I no longer have. Some people notice and ask why I deleted it. I just say I'm reconsidering some things. They assume I got harassed or bullied into silence. Offer support, tell me not to let the haters win. I accept their support, but it feels undeserved. Going forward, I'm more careful about sweeping statements. Still engage in discussions about gender and equality. Still think women face real discrimination and real challenges. Still call out sexism when I see it. But I stop talking about men's work like I understand it. Stop making assumptions about what's hard and what's easy. Start asking more questions instead of always having answers. Never interact with that maintenance worker again. Don't know his name, probably never will. But he fundamentally changed how I see things. Humbled me in a way no one else has. Still consider myself a feminist. Still believe in equality and justice. But I learned something important that day. Being right about some things doesn't make you right about everything. And confidence without understanding is just arrogance. Sometimes the person who needs to be schooled is you. And sometimes the lesson comes from exactly the kind of person you thought you had figured out. That's the most humbling part. I thought I knew better. Turns out I had a lot to learn.